Hi, Marianne. It's so great to connect today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Nate. It's great to be here.
You've researched and written a lot about paradoxes, and I'm curious what lesson you have learned about paradoxes that you'd most like to pass on to others.
Well, Nate, really, what in my study of paradoxes came from looking at things like control versus flexibility and automation and seeing these things being like a tug of war or trade-offs to moving to a paradox mindset, seeing them as yin and yang, seeing actually the greater control you have when done well, the more you can enable flexibility. This is improvisation 101. So this is where I started kind of leaning in. I'll give you the one when you ask me that question, the the paradox that I lean into increasingly flows actually from the control and flexibility and is more around leadership. And it's about being tough and kind. And here's what I mean about this. I mean, I'm a leader, I'm a dean, but I've also studied tensions and paradoxes for 25 years. I think one of the greatest challenges we have as leaders is this question of I have to be tough. I have to hold standards high. I hold people accountable, myself included, have strong metrics. Da, da, da. This all sounds like control. And I need a really collaborative, caring culture that helps people feel comfortable, be their best selves, have a community. And people say, but which one?
Mhm.
So they go back to this binary either or. And what I've found in studying paradoxes is we're thinking about it all wrong. These aren't opposite sides of a continuum, so you have to be one or the other. These are two sides of a coin, and you need both. I have a wonderful mentor and advisor to the work I do on leadership by the name of Doug Conant. He turned around RJ Nabisco and then Campbell's Soup. And he said this is the one he sees most impactful in leaders. And he said, think about what it means to be tough-minded and kind-hearted and start to pull them apart so you don't see them as opposites, but you see them as interwoven because being tough-minded means what are your metrics? What does the bar look like for performance? But kind-hearted is about compassion and people. That's not the same issue. And that lets you think in a different space about doing both. And that's where I get to in paradoxes. These are not contradictions. They're opposing sides that make a greater whole, the yin and the yang. And I think as leaders, we're far better off when people know our tough standards and know how much we care about them as individuals. And now we've got a paradox that works.
So the first thing this made me think of is an interview I did with Brad Stolberg a while back, and he said, if you want to be fiercely self-disciplined, you also need to be fiercely self-compassionate because you are going to mess up, and if you hold yourself to this fierce self-discipline standard and you mess up, you need the compassion to balance it out. Otherwise, you're going to get burned
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And so I love this idea of tough-minded and kind-hearted. So, do you have any success stories where you feel like you've been able to apply this, or somebody else
Yeah.
in your research have you seen this successfully applied?
Yeah, I do. I've actually been working recently with a firm. I'm not going to use their name here, but it's a Fortune 100 firm who they were struggling with the tension between wellness and productivity, but really they were talking about being kind and tough.
Hmm.
So they had during the pandemic and particularly post-pandemic, they had focused so much on people's well-being that the productivity dropped substantially. And they had looked at them as, oh, now we're just leaning on the scale towards one side. And as we started to pull this apart and say, let's really think about what being tough and kind mean at our best, but also at our worst, it helped them realize they needed more of the toughness to balance the kindness. So the well-being, yeah, they cared about people feeling like they weren't burning out. They were having opportunities to care for their families and actually have a life outside of work. But that didn't mean they had to let go of the standards of what it meant to be a really high performing organization and individuals within it. And so actually what they did is they got clearer about putting these standards of performance, the toughness back in and keeping the well-being, all the work they had done actually was making them a better firm and making their highest performers far better because they also could have lives and thrive in a more holistic way.
Interesting example, and it makes me think of the leadership research. And when I was younger, I used to think there's one best way to be a leader, and I need to find that way. And I was probably more leaning towards like, I need to be kind because the best, the greatest leaders are kind. And then you realize, well, the best leaders are also tough. And
Mhm.
over time, you realize, well, and the leadership research supports this, that the best leaders pull from all kinds of leaderships, and
Oh, yeah.
leadership is situationally dependent. And so what I love about your experience is, well, these are a paradox, and they can be on different sides of the coin. You're saying actually the same side of the coin, like they need to work together.
You
And
need them. You
when we
need them
work,
both.
yeah, when they work together, when we do them both, that actually enhances productivity
It
and
does.
feelings of acceptance, and so it all works together.
I mean, I think of it as a parent, now as a grandparent. I mean, this is what tough love is. Tough love is a paradoxical concept that means holding high bars, surrounded by love, and people do better in those opportunities. And I believe that.
One of my favorite stories is from Admiral William McRaven, and they were doing a training exercise in the military. So William McRaven was the admiral who oversaw the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. He was admiral of the Navy when we captured Saddam Hussein. Admiral, the movie was it Captain Phillips? He was admiral over that with
Oh.
Somali pirates. Anyway, training exercise, one of the Navy SEALs accidentally blew off the leg of his colleague. And the Navy's trying to decide, like, how do we deal with this? And some people are saying, it was an accident. We need to, slap him on the wrist, but let him off easy. And Admiral said, no, we need to throw the book at him. We need to send a message to everybody that he messed up. He had his finger in the trigger well when he shouldn't have. It was an accident, but he did make a mistake. It was a costly mistake, and we need to dock his pay, um, drop his rank, like just absolutely throw the book at him. They did it, and he felt like once they threw the book at him and once they held him accountable, he actually started standing up straight and he started gaining more confidence because there was justice there.
Mhm.
He'd been held to a high standard, and a year later he bounced back and won Sailor of the Year. And so that's just a story I think of when you say tough love. I think that's another good example of, tough love is the perfect example of this paradox that you're describing.
Well, that's a powerful example you just shared because as soon as you started telling the story, I was thinking in my mind, if he hadn't thrown the book at him, that young man would have thrown it at himself far harder. And there was actually a real kindness and disciplining him in a way that he could forgive himself through that justice. But a really good example of that needing both. The other I was thinking, HBS, I think it was in their alumni magazine recently, had an article about spirituality and leadership, but it in many ways harkens back to this about, the power of spirituality and these higher level principles and values that are based on love and on caring at a high level and the discipline and drive of strong leadership. And it made me think of um, Clayton Christensen, who was a longtime good friend, talked a lot about this work. So does Arthur Brooks now. I mean, there's a lot of varying studies and practices of leadership that come at two sides of kind of a discipline, rigor, control, toughness, and compassion, love, culture, belonging. I mean, right? You can kind of see these hard and soft sides working together. But I'd like to do more in the way we study, teach, and practice leadership on both sides of that, because I do think they make the leader and all who follow and are impacted better.
It's like a synergy that happens when you do both. When you do one, you're just missing out on a really important aspect of leadership. So, as you've been researching this and teaching it, applying it, what has most surprised you?
what has most surprised me is while I'm a very optimistic person and I see this both and approach as really powerful and positive. Paradoxically, I also very much study the dark side, which is vicious cycles and traps of going too far on one side. And I've seen them again and again. I mean, you could think about it in this very, in the exact way that we're talking about. If you overplay either side of that coin, you actually lose. The firm I'm talking about is one of the best in the world and had overplayed well-being. If I told you the name of the firm, you'd be shocked because nothing about them says they're all about well-being, and they had lost their focus. And they'd gone down this rabbit hole, and you get stuck in a rut. And it's not that kindness doesn't matter, it's that it cannot exist in a vacuum. A singularity causes problems. We overplay our strengths, they become our weaknesses. It's the paradox of success, it's the paradox of kindness. I mean, you can keep, but my point being, the surprise is that there is a dark side of not finding this balancing. And I hope by understanding more of the dark side, it can push us to the light because it's actually not easy balancing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like if there's only kindness, kindness ceases to exist because there has to
That's
be
right.
some sort of like counterweight to kindness.
It's a counterweight. Exactly.
Yes. Oh, really interesting. So I love this idea. I recently interviewed your colleague Wendy Smith about both and thinking. I've just been thinking about it so much since then. It helped me with a number of questions I've been having. And then now I love this angle on it in terms of um, being tough and kind applied to leadership. Any final things you'd like to, sorry, any final things you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
Well, maybe just, the example that really was my aha for this was I found a book. Once upon a time, I used to browse the stacks in libraries, and it was by a guy named Rothenberg. He was a professor at the University of Chicago, and he was studying creative geniuses. And he was reading all of their journals and letters and papers and anything these brilliant people had written. And what he found was the commonality to them was that they leaned into tensions. They saw them as paradoxes. This is Einstein, and is it in motion or at rest, a particle or a wave? This is Mozart. Is it about harmony or discord? Picasso, is it about light or dark? Virginia Woolf, life and death. You don't have to be a creative genius to see opposing demands as creative friction. I've seen it again and again with great leaders at all ilks, at all walks of life. It is really about taking a more holistic perspective to contradictions and seeing that they can work better together.
Really interesting. The magic is in the tension.
The magic's in the tension.
So fun for me, Marianne. I love this lesson. I already look forward to listening to it again. And thanks so much for sharing this lesson. I've got to go get the book. I'm going to get the book because I just want to keep learning more about this. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks for all you do.